Please welcome to the stage President and CEO of Reliability First, Mr. Tim Gallagher.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. In my job, I work with over 300 electric-focused companies across 13 states and the District of Columbia. We're actually a regulatory organization. And I have to tell you, I love co-ops. They are my absolute favorites. I find when I walk around a co-op, the spirit of the staff is fantastic. Everybody has a smile on their face. They take great pride in their work. And I think it's attributable to the structure of the co-ops and the role that they play in the community. I was presenting to one earlier in my career, and just like you did today, the first thing we did was the Pledge of Allegiance. And I just thought that was fantastic. And I sat down, and then they said, now we're going to stand for the prayer. And I said, that's even more fantastic. So I just think of all the things that we've lost over the years that co-ops still maintain. And one other story about co-ops, I was attending a board meeting of one of the co-ops in Maryland in our footprint, and they had a dinner the night before in their offices. It was nothing fancy, it was just fried chicken. And I got to meet the board members, and one of them was an elderly lady, and she walked up to me and said, "Are you Tim?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "I made this for you." And she gave me a chocolate cake. And that does not happen when I go visit AEP and First Energy, I'm telling you. So I thanked her and I said, "Could I please share this?" And she says, "You can do whatever you want with it, it's your cake." So I made a lot of friends with the board members that night. So I don't use terms during my talk that you're unfamiliar with. Just by show of hands, how many of you know who FERC is and what they do? Have you heard of them? Outstanding. How about NERC? Good. PJM? Everybody knows PJM. And this is the hardest one, and I don't expect a lot of hands. Have any of you heard of data centers before? Okay. We're going to talk about all that stuff. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the landscape of what NERC, which is my parent organization, sees across North America from a reliability standpoint, because that's what we do. We do reliability. And I'm fairly certain a lot of that's not going to be news to you, but some of it may be scary, and I'll just warn you that ahead of time. And I'd like to share with you what NERC and others are actually doing about it, so that we're not just admiring problems, but actually trying to solve them. And then I'm going to drill down a little bit about more localized sort of verification of some of the things that NERC is saying about the future are actually starting to come true right now. So that's how the talk is going to be. And I'm going to try to leave time for questions, and I will try to stick around a little bit afterwards if that's okay, if you want to talk with me about anything that's piques your interest. So. Okay. I've already failed. There we go. A little bit about Reliability First and how it fits into NERC, and I'll give you 30 seconds about myself too. Reliability First is one of 6 regions that comprise NERC. And you know who NERC is, so I won't dwell on it. Our headquarters are in Cleveland, or just south of Cleveland, Ohio, in Independence. My staff is about 100 people. It's engineers, it's cybersecurity experts, it's forensic experts. We have a lot of IT folks too, a lot of lawyers. And the model is that NERC sets the direction and sets the standards for the industry to follow and provides the oversight and does the communications, but Reliability First and the other 5 regions are the ones that actually do the work on the ground, work with industry, and help industry directly to address risks. We regulate the industry, so Reliability First does not work for the industry, it works alongside the industry. We are servants of the public. That's where our funding comes from. So if your rates are set by a state, every customer that you serve pays for Reliability First, NERC, and the other regions. For Reliability First, it's about $0.05 a month on folks' bills. That's how much it costs. We're an independent, objective voice of reliability. And one of our big roles right now is informing policymakers about the impacts of the decisions that are before them so that they can make the right decisions to balance the cost, the reliability, and the environmental concerns that they face. And I'll take a moment to say that in my job, I'm not allowed to advocate for any kind of a specific policy position or for a fuel type. I can't be pro renewables or pro gas or pro fossil fuel. I'll tell you I'm pro all of them. The more resources we have, the better, but I can't advocate for one over the other. I'm not supposed to be pro or against data centers, so you're not going to hear those kind of things in what I'm going to talk with you about. But I am able to provide you facts so that you could be informed in the important decisions that you need to make. The best validation that I can offer you about the credibility of Reliability First and our mission is that our board vice chair is the esteemed Craig Grooms, who you all know. And I think you all know how terrific Craig is. And by the way, Craig was just reelected for a second term earlier this week. So congratulations, Craig. How'd I do, boss? He's one of my 14 bosses. So. I'm an electrical engineer. I worked in industry for about 15 years, and during that time I did generation planning, transmission planning, system protection. I worked in a control center for a while, and I even did some rates work. I did work for NERC in the late 90s, and when I was at NERC, I ran their reliability assessment program. I also started up their compliance program and their standards program for them when I worked there. I've been the CEO of Reliability First for over 20 years now, and I was listening intently with the prior discussion because I've experienced a lot of those things. But in other words, if you put my career together, I'm old. And I do love the work I do. I love the mission. It matters to me. You matter to me. So thank you for what you do every day. So Reliability First, I told you, is one of the 6 regions that comprise NERC. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. The only point I want to make on this one, because it's a question that comes up a lot, when the Energy Policy Act of 2005 was crafted that gave NERC, FERC, and Reliability First and the other regions our authorities, there was a specific carve-out in there. We are not allowed to order the addition of any kind of infrastructure to the electric system, whether it's transmission or distribution or generation. And the reason is that is a states' rights issue. So in my job, I can highlight problems. I'm not allowed to offer solutions. So what I tell my team is that we get flashlights, not screwdrivers. So we can hold the flashlight on the problem, we could show it to somebody, it's up to somebody else that has a screwdriver to fix it. And that can be frustrating for me because I come from a very blue-collar family. My dad was a bridge welder and a millwright, and he taught me the value of hard work. And looking at problems is not what I was trained to do by my father, but I've had to adjust to it. Reliability First believes that a successful grid transformation has to have a balance of 3 things, and I talked about them earlier already. One of them is the environment, the second one is the cost, and the third is the reliability. We call this the energy trilemma, and my expertise and what my organization advocates for is the reliability leg of that triangle. And unfortunately, these 3 legs are all mutually dependent. And actions that you take in one leg impact the benefits of the other legs. So good energy policy needs to find the right balance between the 3 of those. And it's important to maintain affordability for ratepayers. We all know that, we all feel that. But it's also essential to make sure that the system's reliable so that power is delivered under all circumstances, especially under extreme weather when it's most needed. And we have to be good stewards of the environment too. When we get in trouble, as policymakers or as an industry, is when we emphasize only one part of this trilemma and we ignore the others. And I will say that for between 2020 and 2024, it felt to me like all the emphasis was on the environmental leg of that trilemma. And I think we ignored the reliability parts and the cost parts. And there's a latency associated with the electric industry because it's very capital intensive. So I think now we're starting to see prices go up. And that's because we focus too much on that one leg of the trilemma. But now all the attention seems to be on price. And I do worry about what's going to happen in the future if we don't take a step back and focus on the reliability leg too. Okay, now the scary stuff. So the operating environment for the bulk electric system is becoming what we describe as hyper-complex. That doesn't mean that each individual risk that's up there is brand new or that we don't know how to deal with it. What's really new is the speed at which these risks come at us, and that these risks are evolving, and because they're becoming so interrelated. They don't stay in their lane. And 2 or 3 of them can manifest themselves at the same time. And it has a magnifying impact on the outcomes. On the left side of that slide, there are 4 major forces driving the complexity. The first is resource and energy adequacy challenges. I'm sure you're very well aware of this. We are removing things faster from the supply side in our industry than we are replacing them. And we've been doing that for a while. And then data centers came along and just are an accelerant on that already existing problem. And the resources that we're adding are primarily renewables, wind, solar, batteries. They use something called an inverter, which is a computer that tries to simulate a sine wave that comes out of a massive spinning piece of machinery. And they do a pretty good job, but not a perfect job. And they bring with them a lot of opportunities, but they also bring some real challenges that we need to be aware of and we need to build into our planning and our operation. The second risk is extreme weather. It's creating more operating conditions that are challenging for system operators. And I'm not going to debate what the causes of this are, but you can look at the data, and we are seeing prolonged, widespread cold spells and hot spells. And we'll talk about a couple of those during the course of my talk with you this morning. And it's not how frequent this happens, it's how sustained it is and how wide the area is that it impacts. And that puts a lot of pressure simultaneously on the electric system infrastructure, the generation, the transmission, the distribution, the fuel supply. In wintertime, we have problems with gas fuel supply and neighboring systems. The third risk is energy policy. A couple of years ago, for the first time, when NERC had a group of experts look at the top risks to the reliability of the electric system going forward, they identified policy, electric policy from lawmakers as one of the top risks. The policy is driving the increased renewables on the system. It is driving electrification of office buildings, of your homes. It's driving more electric vehicles. Emissions policies coming out of the EPA are affecting resource decisions, and siting and permitting continues to be a problem with getting anything new built. So that is something we have to be paying attention to. And the fourth part there on the threat landscape is that it just continues to evolve with cyber and physical securities. We have software vulnerabilities, supply chain risks, ransomware attacks, physical attacks. I don't know if you saw, but the water industry was just attacked 2 or 3 weeks ago. They attributed some of it to Iran, but it just shows you that things can happen in our critical infrastructures. And there are a lot of threats that grid operators have to deal with in real time, and asset owners have to deal with in a planning horizon. But again, the important point about this is these forces, these risks, these threats, they don't stay in their lane. They cross over all of the time. As the resource mix changes, we're going to move to the right side of the slide now, we're going to lose what NERC calls essential reliability services. These are the things behind the scenes that keep the system reliable, the electric system reliable, especially when there's some kind of a disturbance. It's things like frequency response, voltage response, inertia, short circuit currents, ramping, black start. These are all vital, critical things that happen every day without a lot of us knowing about or paying attention to it. And as I mentioned, the renewables that use inverters to use a computer to simulate what a big piece of machinery does, they cannot provide some of those essential reliability services. This is not trying to badmouth renewables, it's just stating facts. They can't do it for now. So there is a practical, necessary level of these essential reliability services that we have to maintain at all times. And if we dip below that line, that's when you're going to start to see problems. Little problems that used to be managed will become big problems. Now, this is not to say that renewables and inverter-based resources are not useful. They're extremely useful. For instance, we're going to talk about data centers later. The ramp rates, or how fast the load goes up at a data center, it's beyond the capability of a physical machine. But batteries can respond to it in real time. So there's a real role there for renewables. They do a really good job on that. But they are computer-based resources. That brings cyber threats with them. I was talking with Craig earlier. There are communication paths that go back from inverters that were created in China that go right back to the Chinese government. And the Trump administration recently decreed that we will not be buying any more inverters from China, which is probably good for security, but they are all over the power system right now. So there are always those cyber threats. So We have what Jim Robb, the CEO of NERC, calls a toxic soup of ever-present cyber and physical threats. When I was younger and I was doing system planning in a utility, we had to prepare and recover for the worst possible contingency that could happen. They called it N-1, and the system had to restore after that. But we were really dealing with things like bad weather, or a piece of equipment that failed, or maybe somebody crashed their pickup truck into a pole. We now have to anticipate purposeful, man-made attacks that can be done at the push of a button somewhere and can take out wide swaths of the electric system. So the stakes have really, really gone up there. And the cyber attack surface just continues to expand as we add more technology to it. We've got control systems, inverter-based resources, distributed energy resources, electric charging vehicle infrastructure, the large loads at the data centers. The data centers use inverters on the load side too. So we have inverters on the supply side that convert non-spinning energy to look like it's spinning, and then we have inverters at the data center that convert it back to the non-spinning so that they can serve all the computers and things that they have. So there's problems on both ends, and there's interactions that happen on both ends. So these changes are occurring at the same time that we're seeing all these affordability concerns. I'm sure you see it, you feel it, it's in the news all the time. The grid is very capital intensive, it's long lead time. I tell people, I've been working on the grid for 40 years or more, and I tell people it's like being the captain of a barge, not a speedboat. You can't do things overnight in this industry because of the amount of capital that it requires and the amount of work that it requires. And I mentioned, if we continue to focus too much on the affordability part, though, although it's important, we'll do it to the detriment of reliability. So we have to start to balance those legs. And then finally, well, I'll just say one thing about this. I testified in New Jersey last summer at a state commission hearing, and I was challenged by a professor of economics that was asking questions. And he said, you're talking a lot about reliability. He said, but we did a poll, a survey of ratepayers in New Jersey, and by far they said the #1 issue to them is affordability, not reliability. And I said, well, he said, what do you think of that? And I said, well, I agree with him. I said, I agree with them because they assume we're going to have the same level of reliability we've had for our entire lifetimes. They assume that every time they turn the light switch on, the lights will come on. They assume that the power won't go out in the middle of wintertime when it's freezing outside. And they assume that the power will be on when it's really, really hot and they need their air conditioning. But that's not going to happen if we deviate attention from reliability. And I think you're going to find that people are going to say reliability is the #1 issue, not cost. And then finally, the risks are becoming increasingly concentrated. There's common technologies, common vendors, common fuels, similar operating characteristics. It exposes us to something that's called common failure mode. So, for instance, declining fuel diversity. The predominant fuel right now in our industry is natural gas. And if there are interruptions in the provision of natural gas, and this happens especially in the winter when things freeze, we are very, very susceptible to having outages in the electric system, because about 60 to 65% of our electricity comes from natural gas now. And the gas infrastructure was not designed for this. If you talk to the gas industry, it was designed to provide gas to commercial customers, but primarily to customers like you and I, to heat our homes. Electricity has become the #1 customer of the gas system, and their pipes and their control systems were never designed for it. So they're trying to keep up with that. Also, a common mode failure is what happens on a day when it's not windy and you lose all of your wind resources. We've had days in the past where 99.5% of the expected capacity from wind farms was not available. 99.5%. That's common failure mode. Same with solar. Everybody knows at nighttime, solar panels don't generate. Batteries are great and a great complement to solar panels, but they're limited between 2 and 4 hour capacity right now. So all of these things have limitations. That's why you need them all. You can't rely too much on one of them. So all of this stuff I told you, the scary stuff, paints a pretty concerning picture about reliability moving forward. So what I'd like to show you now is what NERC says the future looks like. And this is from a report that NERC does every year. It's called their long-term forecast report. It's public. It goes out in the fall of every year, and it looks forward 10 years. And they assess the expected reliability levels of the country and North America, really, on three simple bases, on risk levels. And this is from 2024. And what you'll see there is a lot of the map shows that we are in an elevated risk. And what elevated risk means is if the weather gets bad, or if there are multiple equipment failures, or things get stressed, there's a higher probability that we'll have some outages. That's what elevated risk basically means. And it's important to say that NERC is not predicting or guaranteeing that this is going to happen. They're just looking and assessing trending, and they're looking at the system conditions, and they're telling you what the likelihoods are. That trend has been going in this direction for the past 5 years or so. And NERC has been telling people, and Congress looks at these maps, and when Jim Robb, my friend from NERC, testifies, they hold this map up. So that's 2024. This is 2025. You'll notice now that not only is most of it elevated risk, a lot of it is high risk. Where you and I are sitting right today is a high-risk area. So things are getting worse, and we need things to start to get better. Now, every year we put out these reports, and every year, other than years like when in 2021 when we had Winter Storm Uri, where people died in Texas because they didn't have electricity, but in most years, we make it through. So now we're starting to get challenged in my line of work by folks that say, you always say things are going to be bad, and then it ends up being fine. Is this all just doom and gloom, or are you just telling scary stories? So I'm going to start to show you a few things that sort of are indicators that what NERC is predicting is starting to come true. And these are not hurricanes. It's like lava from a volcano. It's moving slowly towards us, but we can see it now. And these are warning signs that we need to start paying attention to. So I'm going to drill down a little bit now. This is PJM. And if we look just at PJM and we look at what their projected supply and demand looks like, that's the net that you're seeing there, over the next 10 years, you can see that depending on how you want to look at it, PJM could experience shortfalls of electricity supply as soon as 2029. Now, my team does sensitivities around this, and that's why you see those varying points of how far we can survive this. But this is using PJM's own data. They're telling us that in 3 years they might not have enough. It takes 5 to 7 years, under the best of circumstances, to add a new gas plant. We don't have time. So the resources we have now are the resources we're going to have then. Data center load is key in this. Depending on how much of that materializes can drive this in different directions, and it's a very tricky thing to forecast. But the point here is that PJM is seeing the same kinds of things that NERC is warning us about. Second is weather. I talked about extreme weather. And the good news is 2025 generally was temperate. And we still had some major weather events, but when we looked and analyzed the impacts of these weather events on the bulk electric system, it was much better story to tell. But you're dealing with weather. We can't count on every year being temperate. And we've already had some extreme hot weather this year and some extreme cold weather this year. That's why resilience is so important in the electric system. Again, reinforces what NERC's saying. This is, we use a lot of acronyms, I'm sorry. We call these EEAs. EEA stands for Energy Emergency Alert. Highlight on the word emergency. They're supposed to be used in emergency circumstances to maintain grid reliability. It's a tool for the operators. It requires operator intervention to invoke these. It's an emergency. It's supposed to be used on an exception basis, and it should be used rarely. What we're starting to see in the trending is they are being used routinely. Being in an emergency state routinely is not a good place to be. Again, reinforces what NERC is telling us. For the first time in PJM's history, in the wintertime, during Winter Storm Fern of this year, they issued low voltage alerts to their operators across the system. That has never happened in the past. Another indicator of the way things are going. I'm going to talk a little bit about some recent events. So recent they happened last month, so all the data's not in, but there's enough here that I can talk to you about. And we had a couple of heat domes. And you know, when I was a kid, we didn't call storms names, and I don't know what a heat dome was or a polar vortex. I don't know if I'm the only one, but if you don't know what a heat dome is, because I didn't know, according to the Weather Service, it's a large, stationary, high-pressure atmospheric system that acts like a lid on a pot. And that's basically what happened. You had prolonged hot weather in an area, and the atmosphere wouldn't allow it to escape. During those two heat domes, PJM on their own issued 9 of these emergency alerts. There were 30 of these emergency alerts issued over the course of all of the reliability coordinators across NERC. It was extreme. PJM was having temperatures in the mid-90s and up to 100 degrees, over 100 degrees in part of the footprint. PJM reached an unrestricted peak load of 168 gigawatts. Unrestricted means that's what the demand would be if they didn't use demand response or curtailments. They did use those curtailments. They got a 6,000 or 6 gigawatt reduction in their load. But that instantaneous peak without that reduction would have shattered PJM peak loads. The PJM peak load was set back in 2006. So that's how long that had stood there. And just for information, when PJM studies its system ahead of time, for extreme conditions, this is the load that's at the far end pegging the extreme conditions. So this is as far out as it can get. I learned electric system planning at the knees of old timers. And I was trained when I worked for a utility that our job was to serve all the load all the time. We were supposed to take pride in that. That's why we existed. And what I'm going to tell you now is this is not very popular, and it's my opinion. It's not reliability first, but I will tell you based on how I was trained. Demand response, at the end of the day, is load shed. You can plan for it ahead of time. You can call it a nicer term. You can agree to it ahead of time, but it's still not serving electric demand that needs to be served. That's not what I was trained to do. And I don't see how it could possibly be good for an economy or a community or for customers to tell them to expect to be curtailed when the system is stressed. And by the way, the times the system is stressed, as I've showed you, are increasing. So that's my personal opinion. Others can differ because there are a lot of advocates for demand response, but it's not serving the load. So the first heat wave, PJM made it through there with no problems, but they were at the ragged edge. The second heat dome occurred between July 14th and July 17th, and really what saved us in that heat dome, believe it or not, were the Canadian wildfires. I don't know if you got exposed to that. Where I live, it was bad. And I have the world's worst vacation days, I'll just tell you. So I had picked this vacation day. I have 7 kids, so they're all mostly grown now, but getting away from my 7 kids with my wife has always been a challenge. So we just wanted to go to the zoo for a day, just to get out of the house. And we went to the zoo, and I think there was like 7 of us at the zoo because it was so smoky, you couldn't even see. But they had the zoo open anyway. But the smoke from the Canadian fires actually reduced some of the temperatures because of what it did to the atmosphere. So it was a net positive. It also, though, decimates solar. You can't get solar generation during those smoky events. So it just shows you how all this stuff fits together. This is a load curve for PJM. And the point here that I want to make to you is that the load that PJM experienced during both of these heat domes was sustained and consistent at super high levels. Those are really, really extreme. There were no breaks from it. It was constant. And that makes it really, really challenging because pieces of machinery break, generators go on forced outages, and there's a lot of transactions going back and forth because operators in PJM are trying to help operators in MISO, New York ISO, ISO New England, down south. Extreme weather stresses the system, and the longer it goes on, the worse it gets. And the operators have a very difficult job. And I do think, even though PJM got us through this, I think we're playing with fire. The more we continue to be exposed to this kind of extreme temperature for such prolonged times, the greater likelihood that something is not going to go right. Heroic operator actions can only take you so far. This shows the transactions, the imports and the exports between PJM and its neighbors. And the point I want to make here to you is that it's not all going in one direction. Again, tough for the operators. Sometimes hour to hour, PJM is either pushing out power to its neighbors, and then the next hour asking for power from its neighbors. And it becomes really, really complex to manage that. And these are massive amounts of power that we're talking about to keep things reliable. It requires so much intense coordination and communication between the operators, again, at very, very stressed times. And it highlights the importance of not just interconnections, but transmission. And transmission fails in hot weather too. So there's a lot of focus right now on adding generation, but we have to add transmission too. And transmission takes 5 to 7 years to build a gas plant, I told you. To get meaningful transmission built, you're talking 10 to 20 years. And a lot of that is in the siting. Almost half of it is in the siting and the permits. So it's hard to get new stuff built. And there's a lot of interactions between the gas industry and the electric industry, and a lot of coordination that needs to happen. And they really operate on somewhat divergent models. This is the resource mix during the heat domes in July inside PJM. And pretty much in every strain system condition that we study, gas, coal, and nuclear provide the majority of our electricity. That's why it's important to maintain and retain some of those resources. This is not anti-renewable. Again, it's just a fact. When it's really hot, the wind does not blow as much, and you don't get as much out of your wind turbines. Not all the time, but most of the time. When it's dark, especially in the wintertime, solar panels cannot convert the sun's energy into electricity. And batteries have to be charged. So you have to charge them hopefully at nighttime if you can do it, but during the day you've got 2 to 4 hours to play with the batteries. Natural gas during the heat domes provided the largest source of dispatchable generation. It's also very flexible. You can turn it up when the solar panels are off at night, and you can turn it down during the day when the solar panels can displace part of it. Nuclear generation was kind of the bedrock, the foundation. Nuclear plant owners do not like to cycle the plant. Cycle means turn the plant up, turn the plant down. They like to keep it running at a steady rate. That provided quite a bit of electricity. Coal was a very, very important reliability role during this demand. Coal does have the ability to cycle sometimes. There are coal plants in PJM that were set to retire, and the Secretary of Energy invoked some authority that's vested in him under the Federal Power Act. They call it Section 202C, if you ever hear that. He can order power plants to continue to operate if it's in the best interest of the country. And he's done that on numerous occasions. There were some plants in PJM that he ordered to run. He's ordered them to be running since last year when they wanted to retire. Those plants ran flat out during this heat dome, so they were necessary and they were needed. A diverse generation portfolio is the best thing for reliability. So you hear people say all of the above. I'm a true all of the above proponent, but it has to be in the right proportions. So absolutely, wind, solar, batteries, those are great things. They could do a lot, but they can't run the electric system on their own. So we need them in combination with gas, with coal, with nuclear, and hydro. So let's go to data centers. I know it's on everyone's mind. It's in the news all the time. The energy trilemma I talked to you about at the beginning, it applies to data centers too, on a little different scale. And I know all of you read about the data centers and you're aware of the divergent opinions that are starting to surface on data centers and their value and their necessity and their impact on land and resources and communities and electricity prices. Data centers are not new. They've existed for years. They process your credit card transactions. They control traffic lights. They provide services to emergency response management for pretty much every city in the country. Think about the pandemic if you were working from home or your kids were learning from home and they could not get in touch with the classmates, or you couldn't get in touch with work because you didn't have Zoom, or you couldn't stream Netflix. All of those things come from data centers. They've been awesome customers for decades for electric companies because they are decent load, not massive like they are now, and they had absolutely flat load duration curves, and I'll show you a couple of those in just a second. But a load duration curve just shows you what level of demand do they evidence and how long does it stay like that, how often does it change. And for most data centers, it's a square. They go up, they stay there, they almost never come down. It's great revenue, it's very predictable, it's very easy for system operators to work around. It was perfect. But things are changing, and some of the data centers that are coming in, I used to say they're as big as the city of San Francisco. Some of them are like 3 or 4 times the city of San Francisco in terms of electric demand. Think about that, an entire city. And you have one data center campus that uses more electricity than that entire city uses. It just blows my mind. The other thing that blows my mind is, for years, we have converted fuel and electric energy into commodities with raw materials, into steel, aluminum. Now we are using electricity to convert it into information. Just information. And it uses way more electricity than it does to make a roll of steel. I just think about that. It's just mind-numbing. So, and this happens in 18 to 24 months. They can put one of these data centers up. Remember, we're in a barge. I'm not a speedboat captain. I can't respond in 18 to 24 months. So the hyperscalers, as they call them, are getting really creative on how they push things. And they do this at one injection point. It's very dense. It's not spread and dispersed like a city would be across the electric system. It's in one spot. So Ohio has almost 250 data centers. The stats vary depending on who you look at. We rank as the fastest growing state for new data centers. And Columbus, New Albany, this area that we're in right now, that's the hub of all the activity. If you've ever heard Bill Furman, the CEO of AEP, speak about this, he says it took 100 years for AEP, and AEP operates in 7 states, so it's not just Ohio, but it took 100 years for AEP to get to the size they are, which is total demand of 37 gigawatts. All of Ohio, just for reference, is 30 gigawatts right now, okay? 37 gigawatts across all of AEP's different systems in Texas and West Virginia, all the places they are. He said over the next 5 years, they are forecasting 56 gigawatts of additional demand. Twice the size that AEP got to be over 100 years in 5 years. Unbelievable, unfathomable. He said it's not speculative. These are all data centers that are signed up. And he said even if they walk away from the table, there are 180 gigawatts more of data centers that want to sign up with the AEP system. That's the scope of the problem that we're dealing with. There's one Google proposed massive data center in Lima, Ohio. It's 170 acres. It has over 100 backup diesel generators. I don't know if you've ever been around a diesel generator. I have. Ain't pretty. It makes a lot of noise and a lot of black smoke when it goes off. It's estimates of over 1 gigawatt of demand just in that data center. It will use, according to reports, 5 million gallons of water every day. Scary stuff. Piketon, Ohio, former uranium enrichment site. The Trump administration announced plans for a 10 gigawatts of data centers because it's owned by federal government, and they're going to add 9.2 gigawatts of gas-fired generation in phases. And the first phase could be as early as 2028. So things are not going to happen to us, they are happening to us. And one other complication about data centers is they have different models. There's really 2 of them. There's hyperscalers, that's Google, Meta, Amazon. And then the other model is multi-tenant. And multi-tenant is Greg Grooms has his company and he builds data centers and he's basically a landlord. He provides the infrastructure, the connections, the maintenance, but he has 400 tenants in there. He has no idea exactly what they're doing. He just has them renting from him. It's difficult with the multi-tenant data centers, and that's the majority of them, to do anything from a reliability standpoint because we're going to write standards for the hyperscalers and for the big data centers, but it's not fair to give Craig Grooms, the landlord, a bunch of requirements that he can't control. And a lot of folks are talking about curtailing data centers when the demand is stressed, or the system is stressed. I don't know if you, in a multi-tenant one, I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you pick them, and you sure don't want to pick the ones that control the traffic lights or that provide emergency response to the hospitals. So it's complicated, very, very complicated. Okay, load duration curves. I'm sorry, these are a little messy, but the one on the top, the blue one, that's like a traditional data center, the kind we worked with for 20 years or so. And you can see it's fairly constant. It's almost a line if you drew the points. And the magnitude between the peaks and the troughs is not massive. It's very manageable. But if you look at the green one, so I don't know if you know what an arc furnace is, but basically they take steel and sometimes scraps and they put it in a big container and they basically bounce around an arc of electricity in there and they short circuit it. And as it hits different metals, the electricity demand goes way up or way down. That's what that looks like. But this is like an arc furnace on steroids. The magnitude is massive. And there's no electric machine that can match the rise and fall from the peak to the trough. It's beyond the capabilities of those physical controls to do it. So this is primarily from data centers that do learning. So there's two kinds of artificial intelligence. There's learning or training. That's when the model is like building itself and learning how to do stuff. And then there's inference, which is like using what the model knows. And this is when it goes into learning mode. So you can see how widely it goes up. And it's very unpredictable. And my understanding is the hyperscalers cannot perfectly control that because a lot of it's driven by outside external forces. Bitcoin miners do the same thing. I don't know about you. I've had Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin and blockchain explained to me like 4 different times by experts. It just doesn't penetrate my head. I have no idea what they're doing. It just seems all fake to me. But somehow when they do this Bitcoin mining, it does the same thing. But they have learned to arbitrage it because Bitcoining, they can turn it off and on as they want to. So in Texas, they make a lot of money from Bitcoin mining. They also make a lot of money from playing the market and voluntarily turning their demand off and on too. So there's that factor also. So with data centers, it's not just there's more load, it's a different kind of load. And operators have to get used to it. And so this is one of the things I wanted to show you. This is very, very recent, just happened. All of the facts are not in yet, but Dominion that serves Northern Virginia, that's where almost, I think 80% of the data center cloud computing power in the world is in the same corridor there in Loudoun County, Northern Virginia. Land there goes for $5 million an acre. If you want to sell it to a data center, it's probably more now. That's an old statistic. But in late July, just a few weeks ago, there was a transmission line fault in Northern Virginia on a 230 kV line. And that's the kind of thing that we don't like to see happen in our industry, but it happens. And it's not unexpected or unanticipated, and we recover from that very easily. But what happened was when that line tripped, almost 4 gigawatts of data center load rejected, went away. Shouldn't have happened. I worked in a control center. I can't imagine sitting at a control room and seeing 4 gigawatts. The city of San Francisco is 1,400 megawatts, 1.4 gigawatts, that's the city of San Francisco. 4 gigawatts, almost 4 San Franciscos just went poof. It's gone. And it does awful things to the electric system. No breakers opened, no relays operated. It's just gone. And what we found out is because of power quality and the way that the data centers measure using their computer controls, if the voltage is not exactly within range, they automatically take themselves off and they put themselves on their backup generator or they transfer their demand somewhere else. And they don't tell the system operators that this is going to happen. This was the single largest load rejection in PJM history. It's massive. This is worse than a nuclear plant tripping off. This is like 4 nuclear plants tripping off, all in the same instant. So PJM was able to recover, but I don't like to keep rolling the dice on things like this. So there's a lot of coordination that has to happen, a lot of conversation that has to happen between data centers and the electric system about business models and what we can do and what we can't do. So what's NERC doing about it? Well, NERC has been studying a lot of these events when they happen, like the one that just happened here. There are other ones that happened in Texas a couple of times. and in 2024. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to learn about risks by experiencing them. I'd rather learn about them before they happen and do whatever I can to keep them from happening. So NERC has been working really hard, and they've put together lots of groups of experts, and they have included the hyperscalers in these efforts to study how these large computational loads interact with the grid, to come up with standards to protect and safeguard the reliability of the grid, and to better understand the data centers. And they're looking at the reliability impacts on the bulk power system. And NERC has done a comprehensive review of all of the standards that they have to see where there are gaps, and they found a lot of gaps, so they're writing some new standards. They've also worked really hard to study the hyperscalers and the data centers to understand the characteristics of their load and when they do things like reject themselves because of power quality issues. But it's complicated for the reason I said before about the different business models. Google's very different than the Craig Grooms multi-tenant data center. But there's a number of white papers, if you're interested, and they're really, really good, that NERC has put together on the characteristics of these loads, if you want to educate yourself. And they're not too heady for anybody to read. They've talked about the gaps between their standards, and they're also talking about security and compliance and how we can work together with the data centers on that. Because these issues are going to get more complex, and they're going to continue to evolve. So I highly recommend you read those. What is FERC doing? So FERC is very active in this too, and my sense is that the Trump administration is very pro-data center. I already mentioned they have plans to put the big data center complex in Piketon. Artificial intelligence, depending on who you talk to, is vitally important for national security, and that's why I think the government is interested in this. And for the past year or two, FERC and the Department of Energy have been pushing NERC and pushing industry to come up with ways to reliably interconnect these large computational loads that are associated with data centers. And they look at things like co-location, which is you build the data center with a generator like attached to it behind the meter, and that's happening. The hyperscalers that I work with, initially, when they first started talking to us, they said, we're going to do everything green. Every bit of electricity that we consume will be green. And I said, I don't think you could do that. And they said, oh, yes, we can. And then they came back and said, we can't do that. So then they said, we are going to buy existing power plants if somebody will sell it to us. So Susquehanna Nuclear Power Plant in Pennsylvania, in my territory, that was acquired by Meta, and they are going to use that nuclear plant to serve just their data center. Palisades is an old decommissioned nuclear plant in Michigan, and that is being restarted. It is serious enough that 3 Mile Island, we all remember 3 Mile Island, and there was a catastrophe on one of the units. The other unit shut down because it wasn't economical. They're going to restart 3 Mile Island, and they're going to use all that electricity for the data center. But they're running out of those things, so now they're starting to add gas turbines, just like industry does. I told you about the diesels that they're going to put out in Lima. Some, because of supply chain issues, some of the data centers are buying old jet engines off of commercial aircraft. And what I learned is there are restrictions on how many hours a jet engine can run for safety from the FAA, and then it's like scrapped. You can't use it for that. But it can be refurbished and converted to generate electricity. So they're starting to buy those and do that. So they're pulling out all the stops. These are people that have lots of money, and they're not going to be stopped. But so FERC is trying to come up with rules for all of those things so that it can be done reliably. And the NERC process is a consensus process working with industry to come up with rules that balance everybody's perspectives and are good for reliability. But NERC's had to move a lot faster than they wanted to on this. And we're going to have to accept that because that's the best we can do. So what can you do on this? I would say learn as much as you can about the data centers. You're all smart people. I know you're paying attention to this. It's in the Wall Street Journal every day. AI is in the Wall Street Journal every day. To me, it seems like there's a lot of conflicting information about the data centers. I'm not going to say it's misinformation or disinformation. People like to say that. But it sure is conflicting. And it's hard to know what the truth is on some of the things. Some of the statistics get weaponized, I learned. I told you about the 5 million gallons of water a day for that data center is proposed out in Lima. I've seen some water use statistics that are even beyond that. And when I looked into it, the folks that were reporting against this were anti-data centers, so they were including the entire supply chain there. So the water that's used for fracking was included in there, the water that's used for cooling and the generator is used. It was beyond just what the customer was using. So you have to be careful what you look on. I know that you run lean, but to the extent that you can weigh in on the large load standards, and I'm going to have to start registering large loads. So already in my footprint, Amazon is registered as a, believe it or not, as a utility that I have to regulate because they have behind the meter generation, and that's a whole new world for us. They have lots of lawyers, I'll just tell you that. But they've been really good to work with, and they're trying to understand it. They want to do the right things. But paying attention to that registration is important too. NERC has until the end of the year to develop these standards. That's the timeline that FERC gave them. And that's, sometimes your fastest work is not your best work. So what they're going to put out initially is probably not going to be optimal. It's going to have to evolve. But anything you can do to help bring your perspectives or let Craig know so he can bring this up, because Craig's very active in this environment. A little bit about Ohio. Like the rest of the states in the Reliability First footprint, Ohio's grappling with the right policy, the trilemma for addressing data centers. It seemed early on they were like, everybody come on, we want you. But it seems like that's slowing a little bit. AEP did a really prominent change, the way they did their data center tariff, and to make sure that they weren't going to be building things that the data centers wouldn't use in the future and then pass the cost on to the customers for things that they're not going to use. They require that 85% of the energy cost be paid by the data center, whether they use it or not. And, but on the other side, Ohio was giving a lot of tax abatements and tax exceptions to encourage data center development. A lot of states now are developing policies or issuing moratoriums on data centers. And I'm not smart enough to tell you if that's the right thing or not, but it's counter to what the federal government wants to see happen. And there's a House Bill 646. I think it passed the House earlier this year, but it's going to create like a data center study group to get better information about things like the water use, the tax policy, and the role of local government. So this is going to continue to move really quickly, and it's going to be hard to know what the right thing is to do, but we need to pay attention to it. I think Ohio they are talking about bring your own generation. I know President Trump talks about bring your own generation, so if you want to build a data center, it's on you as a data center owner to bring the electricity supply with you. That sounds good. I mean, it makes sense, but the same problems that a utility faces are going to be evidenced by the data center. Supply chain, you can't get the stuff right now. You can't buy it. Same EPA permits, same fuel security issues, same maintenance, same forced outages. I just don't know how that fits. And then the reason data centers want to connect to the bulk electric system is their whole business model is based on 100% availability and reliability. They will never, ever, never, the data center will never go down. You'll never have to worry about your credit card going into a machine and not working because of the data center. So I don't know that they want to just have their own generators and be like a mini utility. It's a business that they're not well versed in, and I don't think they're super interested in. They'll do it if they have to, but that's sort of the state of things in Ohio. And then takeaways for you. So I hope if I didn't inform you, entertain you, I at least scared you or piqued your interest a little bit this morning. But I want to tell you, all is not lost. Okay, there is still a lot of positive momentum, but we've got real work to do, and we don't have much time to waste. We're starting to see some coal plants that were going to retire. We're starting to see deferrals of those retirements because the owners see that they can make money by running the plants. So just one divergence here for you. You may hear that it's not energy policy that's causing coal plants to retire, it's that they're not economical. And that's true to an extent. So when they say it's not economical, what happens is during the day or when the wind is blowing, the renewables that operate basically on zero fuel or zero variable costs, they displace energy that would have been provided by a coal plant. So the coal plant doesn't need to run. It's cheaper to run on a variable basis in the moment, the renewables, so the coal plant doesn't run. We still need the coal plant for when it's really hot or when it's really cold, and because they provide these essential reliability services. But because the number of hours that they get to generate now are reduced because of the advent of the renewables, it's harder for the owner of that plant to get their money back. It's just basic economics. So when they say it's not economical anymore, there's a reason for that. It's because it's been displaced. But we can't fully displace it. We can't get rid of it. We need it. If renewables can provide all the essential reliability services, I'd say go for it, but right now they can't do it. So we're starting to see deferrals. The Secretary of Energy has used his authorities as much as he can to keep plants running. There's a lot of recognition by policymakers that siting and permitting and zoning are issues. They're issues locally, statewide, federally. And if we can't solve those, we can't get anything built. There's a lot of effort being made by the gas industry to do better coordination with the electric industry, and the electric industry to do better coordination with the gas industry. I personally took PJM and First Energy to a gas control center to show them what they're doing to those poor gas operators when they turn on these massive power plants and don't even tell them it's coming on. And then I took the gas folks to PJM and First Energy Control Center and said, this is what they're up against, and these are the time constants they deal with, so that we can start to bridge those gaps. NERC's developing registration criteria for the large loads. We're going to be registering them. They're going to be subject to compliance and enforcement just like other utilities. There are cold weather standards and extreme weather standards that NERC has developed. Since 2014, polar vortex, again, which is something that didn't exist when I was a kid, but I learned it's an important thing. My team has gone out in the field and we actually go to power plants and we help make sure that they are properly weatherized for extreme cold weather. We have done hundreds of plants. I can show you statistical regressions that show a direct correlation between our visits and my experts showing them where they have deficiencies and better performance of the plants. And it's good for the plants because they don't make money when they don't generate. And it's good for electricity and for customers because then people don't die when it's freezing outside and they don't have service. Nuclear energy is being seriously talked about again. I'm sure you're hearing a lot of that. It may be the real answer. As I mentioned, 3 Mile Island's getting restarted. When they're starting 3 Mile Island again, that means they're serious. But the small modular reactors that you hear about, the 250 or megawatt or so reactors, my understanding is we're still 10 years away or so from that, even though there's some demonstration projects. But there's one issue I want to share with you that no one talks about, and I learned about it by accident. In this country, we do not have the ability to produce the fuel that is used in a small modular reactor. They need highly enriched uranium because it's a much smaller chamber and there's less space for the reactions to occur. And we get almost all of our highly enriched uranium fuel right now from Russia. And that was supposed to stop, but the Secretary of Energy had the ability to put an exception in base, because there was actually a law passed to prohibit us from buying it from Russia. He has an exception he can use, and he's been using it so we can get this fuel. But that exception expires, I think, in 2029 or 2030. So I don't know. You can build all the small modular reactors you want. We don't have the uranium to fuel them. It's highly fissionable, almost weapons grade uranium that we're talking about. And it requires special facilities. The good news is where OREC is, where we used to enrich uranium, that's going to be refurbished to our very first highly enriched uranium site. It's going to take years to do that. And guess what? It's very electricity intensive. So to produce the fuel, we need more electricity. You know, onshoring the microchips is great, takes a lot of energy to produce those things. Making solar panels takes a lot of energy. So everything that we're doing goes back to electricity at some point. So I just wanted to put that on your radar. I encourage you to research it on your own. Read about our ability. I think it's called HALEU, highly enriched uranium. Read about it. No one talks about it. It's a real thing and it's scary. We also can get some from Canada and European countries, but the fact that we cannot, it's almost like being dependent on the Middle East for oil. We're dependent in some cases on our enemies for this fuel. Okay, I'm sorry, this has been long. One more slide for you. So NERC puts out a lot of wonderful information. Again, it's very consumable. It's on their public website. These things they call reliability insights, and they put them out periodically. There's going to be a couple coming out soon. But they talk about things like the kind of resources and their impacts on the grid. They talk about data centers and large loads and a lot of other topics that would be informative for you as board members and CEOs in the co-op industry just to stay abreast of. And please, my team and I are at your disposal. If there's ever anything we can do or answer a question for you, we would be delighted to do it. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you for patiently listening. If there's time for questions, I'm happy to answer questions if you have some. Or if you're just depressed and you want me to go away, it doesn't hurt my feelings.
For 2 questions, so 2 quick ones that will go right over there, and we'll end on those.
Yeah, what actual authority do you have for reliability? The reason I ask is one of the discussion points I've always heard is that the crux of the problem is that there's actually nobody who's actually got true authority over reliability. There's NERC, FERC, reliability first, but as far as anyone having actually true authority for reliability is the crux of the problem. But so I'm just kind of asking, is that true? And if so, what is the structural or policy fix to that?
It's a great question, and the answer is, in some ways you're right, and in some ways there is a direct line. So it just gets complicated because the solutions require policymakers to get involved. So who's responsible for reliability? I'm trying to evade your question. NERC is responsible for reliability. I'm responsible for reliability. But again, my powers are limited. So all I can do is tell you, I wouldn't do that. I can't tell you what to do. And I know it really bothers policymakers when I talk with them and I point out the problems, just like I pointed out all the problems to you guys. And they say, well, what do we do about it, Tim? And I say, well, I'm not allowed to tell you. And they say, oh, you're one of those guys. So that's part of the problem. There's a states' rights versus federal rights problem that's always going to be there that gets in the way of this. I didn't talk about markets too much because that's not my thing, but markets are a problem too. A lot of the problems that we're seeing in PJM are because of the way the market is structured. And it impacts reliability, but who has authority over that? So it's multi-jurisdictional, and you're right. One of the biggest problems is everybody thinks they're in charge, and that means nobody's in charge. I'll just share with you one anecdote. Every year, NERC does a fantastic exercise, or every 2 years, I'm sorry, it's called GridX, and they simulate nationwide disturbances, and they bring together all these experts from government and foreign governments and different infrastructures, and I get to listen to the private ones there, and there's a lot of federal agencies that are on those calls, and some of which I never heard of before. You would be surprised how many federal agencies there are. And every one of them thinks they're in charge. And a lot of them keep saying, well, the White House will do this and the White House will do that. And I was not supposed to talk, but I think you know by now, Craig knows, I talk a lot, right, Craig? So I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. I said, I'm sorry, you guys keep saying the White House. What does that mean? Who is the White House? And they couldn't answer. I mean, I said, is that the president? Is that some czar? Is that chief of staff? And they couldn't answer. So I'm sorry, my answer to your question is you're right. And the policy changes, they implicate so many different organizations at state and federal levels that I don't know how to navigate out of it. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's the honest answer.
I think we're going to have to leave it there to get you out on time for our break. Appreciate it. We'll give Tim a round of applause.